it's really important to focus on things that matter to you or that you're curious about. In the documentary field, or if one is working on issues, on themes, it's about much, much more than the ability to take a picture.
Ja, wenn du regelmäßig Gate 7 hörst, dann wird dir auffallen, dass diese Folge ein bisschen später als gewohnt erscheint, an einem Mittwoch statt wie gewohnt am Sonntag. Das hat folgenden Grund, und zwar bin ich mit reichlich Jetlag aus Kolumbien zurückgekehrt. Ich war im Januar ja in Kolumbien unterwegs. Für die Zeit habe ich vorgearbeitet und konnte auf mein Archiv zurückgreifen. Nach meiner Rückkehr ging es dann in den normalen Produktionsrhythmus wieder über. Das heißt, ich musste diese Folge nochmal schneiden, ein Intro aufnehmen und all das hat ein bisschen länger gedauert. Und daher jetzt diese Folge mit einer kleinen Verzögerung, aber nicht nur eine Verzögerung, was die aktuelle Produktion angeht. Dieses Interview ist auch schon ein paar Tage, genau gesagt Monate alt, und wie schnell die Zeit manchmal vergeht, das habe ich jetzt gerade erst wieder gemerkt, als am 27. Januar eine E-Mail in mein Postfach kam von Lois Lammerhuber. Er hat daran erinnert, dass auch in diesem Jahr natürlich wieder das Fotofestival Gacilly Baden Photo stattfindet. Genau gesagt vom 15. Juni bis zum 15. Oktober. Und in den vergangenen beiden Jahren durfte ich ja dort zu Gast sein, habe fantastische Fotografinnen und Fotografen kennenlernen dürfen. Und hoffentlich darf ich in diesem Jahr auch wieder mit dabei sein. Darauf freue ich mich schon sehr. Das wird sicherlich in der zweiten Jahreshälfte dann auch ein Großteil der Interviews und der Berichterstattung hier im Podcast wieder einnehmen. Und lange Rede, kurzer Sinn, aus dem vergangenen Jahr sind noch 2-3 Folgen im Archiv. Unter anderem dieses Interview mit Nyani Quarmyne. Mit Nyani habe ich mich in Baden unterhalten. Nyani ist ein freiberuflicher Fotojournalist, arbeitet viel für die Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung, Frankfurter Allgemeine Sonntagszeitung und ist kreuz und quer unterwegs auf der Welt. Schwerpunkt liegt auf Afrika, aber auch an anderen Orten hat er schon fotojournalistisch gearbeitet, und er geht gerade, was die Planung, was die Umsetzung und auch die Finanzierung seiner Projekte angeht, sehr kreative Wege. Darüber sprechen wir in diesem Interview. Wir sprechen auch allgemein darüber, was ein starkes Fotoprojekt ausmacht, wie man sowas angeht und noch viele weitere Themen mehr. Ich hoffe, du hast Freude an diesem Interview, und bevor es losgeht, jetzt nur noch ein kurzer Hinweis, und zwar habe ich in der Vergangenheit ja, wie erwähnt, ausführlich von dem Fotofestival Gacilly Baden Photo berichtet. Viele Interviews sind dabei entstanden, also wenn dir dieses Interview gefällt, dann geh ruhig auch nochmal in das Archiv zurück. Ich habe dir einige Folgen in den Shownotes verlinkt. In deiner Podcast-App kannst du das dann aufrufen. Und da findet sich noch einiges, viele Interviews mit bekannten Namen aus dem Bereich Fotojournalismus und Reportagefotografie. So, und jetzt aber direkt hinein in das Interview mit Nyani Quarmyne. Viel Spaß! Hello Nyani, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to be here.
Nyani, did I pronounce your name correctly?
Yes, that's right, Nyani.
Okay, it's Nyani, and your last name?
Quarmyne.
Quarmyne.
Yeah, Nyani Quarmyne.
Okay, where does that name come from?
From Ghana. My dad is from Ghana. And so Nyani is just a traditional first name in my dad's kind of ethnic group that's given to a firstborn son. And the family name is Quarmyne. So.
Mm-hmm. So you were born in Ghana?
No, I was born in India. My dad's Ghanaian, but my mother is Filipino. And after they met in the Philippines, they moved to India, which was where I was born. And then I've kind of grown up and lived in a number of countries after that. So
you're a true citizen of the world. This is why I started this interview with a little bit of background to you. It's if you have a look at your portfolio, you see that you've worked all over the world, and you grew up many places, been traveling a lot, and now you're in Germany, based in Düsseldorf, I believe. So you speak very, very good German, and we could have done this interview in German as well, I'm pretty sure, but
Well, I'm definitely more comfortable in English, so thank you for being accommodating in that way.
Yeah. Nyani, we're here in Baden at the photo festival, and one of the beautiful things about this festival is that it brings together photographers, journalists. We've been here for the media days of the festival, and there's certainly some photographers that when you look at the names that are exhibiting their work, so you make some appointments beforehand, and there's some photographers that you like to talk to, and then again there's these coincidences, or at the dinner table you sit next to someone, you get to talk, and you find out, wow, this is kind of interesting. And so this is how we got together here. We had a dinner last night. We sat next to each other, and we got to talk a little bit, and now we're here to talk about your work, which is very wide-ranging. It's very fascinating. I spent a good amount of time looking at your pictures last night after all the official program.
Oh, thank you.
So you mainly work about your work concentrates on environmental issues and health issues. This is kind of like the broader arc above your photography.
At the moment, yes. It's certainly been an evolution. I'm fortunate that over the last few years, I've been able to work more independently and to work on topics that I and my partner in a lot of these projects, the journalist Laura Zaum-Reiferscheid, we've conceived a lot of these things together, and we've been fortunate in that we've been able to find the funding to support the reporting trips. And it's always nice to be able to work independently. We've also been very fortunate to have a really good partnership with Frankfurter Allgemeine Sonntagszeitung, and in particular with Sonja Castellan, the editor of the Wissen section there. And so yeah, it's been good to be able to work on this kind of collection of stories and to be able to pursue one's interests. And yes, over the past few years, it has been particular global health themes, like tramadol addiction in West Africa, snake bite, sickle cell disease. But I also feel increasingly compelled to work on environment and sustainability issues, because they are obviously so important, but also because particularly when we sit in comfortable places like here in Baden, it becomes very easy to oversimplify things or to take a polarizing position. But when you get closer to the issues, you find out how complex and how interwoven the environmental, the economic, the social, the health issues all are. And it's really necessary that we take an approach to these issues that recognizes this complexity and that we need to see things as a whole. And I think we're not going to be able to make our way out of this sustainability mess that we're in unless we start to look at things more holistically. So that's also very much part of my focus at the moment.
Yeah. Before we look at some concrete projects that in which you try to tackle this complexity that you just mentioned, let's go back a little bit in time and talk about what got you interested in photography in the first place. How did you become a photographer?
It's interesting. I think on some level, it was somewhere in the background of my consciousness, perhaps, in that I was talking to Gerd Ludwig last night and recalling that I grew up with National Geographic in the house. You know, my parents had a subscription, so pictures were always there. My dad enjoyed taking pictures as an amateur photographer, but it was not really something that I got into much until much later in life. I mean, I did have a camera in my teens, one that my dad gave me, but I never really understood what I was doing. And then in, I guess, about 2007, 2008, I was living in Australia at the time and would spend a lot of time on my motorcycle, just riding out into the middle of nowhere in Western Australia. And I started trying to photograph the landscapes I was riding through, and the pictures were terrible. So I thought, okay, you need a better camera, obviously. So I got a better camera. The pictures were still terrible, just bigger. And so I started thinking, okay, maybe the problem is not the camera. And so I started, buying photography magazines and reading about it. And that coincided with a holiday with my family in North America. And so I bought an entry-level DSLR and started teaching myself to shoot, and was immediately hooked. And so I knew straight away that this was what I wanted to do. So I wrapped up my consulting life as it was, and we spent a year traveling in North America, which was a year of learning to shoot, basically, and was also very helpful in helping me find my initial direction. And along the way, I did sort of a remote mentorship with a great Texan photographer called Arthur Meyerson. And so he was also very influential in helping me concentrate and focus my work, at least at that initial stage. And then, I went to Ghana, which was always something of an unanswered question for me because my dad is Ghanaian, but I had never lived there. And so based myself there and started working. Okay.
Quite a career change, like from working in consulting and then switching to photography. How was that transition? I mean, I imagine if you, like you described it, you had no previous experience with photography. Your pictures weren't quite at that level where you could make a living out of that, and then trying to learn everything that it takes to become a photojournalist. I'd like to talk. If you could talk a little bit more, describe this process, how you got there. Like you mentioned a mentor, which is obviously very important to learn from other people, more experienced people. But
there were certainly a few hard lessons learned along the way. I often tell people that it's important to be really stubborn sometimes, certainly for most of us anyway, photography is not the business that you get into to make a wonderful living and get rich. And so financially, without a doubt, it would have been more sensible to remain a consultant. But sometimes you just have to be bloody minded about these things and stick with it. Of course, there was a lot of research and figuring out and, what should a contract look like and what should be in it. So a lot of trial and error in terms of learning along the way. I was also fortunate in that I shot a project very, very early on in Ghana on climate change and villages that are being swallowed by the sea. In fact, 2 projects, that one and one on the living conditions and conditions of care of the mentally ill. And they got a little bit of attention at the climate change series at the Bamako Biennale, and then was exhibited at Paris Photo. And with those bodies of work, I was also able to start working with Panos Pictures, the agency that I'm still with today. So those things both helped in terms of a little bit of recognition, a little bit of exposure. And then also I must say that Ghana at that time, and probably still would be today, was a really good place to be based because I was in a good position to save the clients that I worked with the cost of flying a photographer out from Europe or from the US or wherever. So it was a very good base in that way. And I did a lot of assignment work all over the continent, a lot of it in the nonprofit sector, so with NGOs and so on, the UN or UN agencies, but also some corporate social responsibility work in particular for multinational corporations and so on. So it was a few things that sort of helped me get through that process of coming into the industry. But it's an unusual profession in that so much of what we do alone. And I think, I didn't study photography formally, but I still meet people who have gone to university to study photography and so on, but they still haven't come out of it necessarily with the negotiating skills or with the contractual understanding or, things like the travel skills one needs to be able to deal with being on the road for weeks or months at a time or whatever. It's very much been a process of thinking about what worked and, okay, how could I do that better next time, or adjusting as you go and creating your own systems for your workflow and to make sure that you can stay organized and sane as you're on the road and working on projects and so on.
Yeah, very complex, all the processes that are important. The business side, of course, that how the industry works, how to get in contact with agencies, with newspapers or with media outlets that eventually publish your work. But to get them interested, you need convincing body of work. You need compelling images. And how was that process? Or when was the point where you said, okay, from the pictures that I took at the beginning that pretty much sucked, as you said, how did you get to pictures or was there a moment where you took a picture and said, okay, well, now I'm getting there? And what was it that took you to that level?
I'm not sure if there was a particular moment, but of course one begins with the basics that we all begin with, and that the photography magazines rehash ad nauseum, but the basics of composition and of course learning the fundamentals of photography and using your camera and so on. So that's of course all critically important. But for me, it was a process of inculcating those basics, but then just practice. I mean, I spent a year essentially practicing during this year of travel around the US and Canada. And that was also an opportunity to shoot everything that I found in front of my lens. So over the course of that year, it was everything from portraits of a minister that we met in Canada to music and street festivals to landscapes to more reportage or documentary little mini projects in places that we came across, street photography. The great thing, of course, with digital is that you can progress so much faster because you don't have to wait to get your film developed, and it doesn't cost money once you've made the initial investment in the gear. So it was really just a fairly obsessive process of practicing. And then, of course, as you begin to pick up assignment work, you learn to work under pressure. And over time, you learn to focus more on what you need for the specific story that you're working on. Mm-hmm. And you start to think more strategically about the fact that, okay, yes, that's a picture, but it's not a picture that I need. This is a more important picture. Or you start to think about the images or the themes that you need to bring together to make it a cohesive story or a body of work. And I think that was actually a very important part of making that transition from starting out as a hobbyist or starting out just as an interest, is that we all get lucky with a single picture, or we might work really hard and, we get a single picture that's great. But to be able to shoot assignment work, I had to learn to deliver a level of consistency, and you can't go out into the field and come back with, 300 rubbish pictures and one great one. Mm-hmm. And so that was also very much a learning process. And of course, as you get better, you're able to have more keepers, and, you shoot less, but deliver a more consistent output. Mm-hmm. But it's definitely, I think, a process of evolution for all of us, and it's very much an ongoing process of evolution for me.
Yeah, never stops, and learning how to master the medium, you master language, the visual skills, but then you need something to speak about, to use that voice that photography gives you in a visual way, to say something, to communicate. How was that? How did you find the topics that were dear to you and that you wanted to work on?
Well, I found fairly early on that basically I suck at shooting things I don't care about. So I think it's really important to focus on things that matter to you or that you're curious about. And again, that's part of the journey. Like, you work on things and then you sort of decide, well, actually, I don't really want to do more of that kind of work. Or sometimes it's a question of, I don't want to work with organizations that do particular things, or, so one grows with those things. But definitely my work is strongest on issues that are of concern to me, or that I have some emotional connection to, an opinion or a position on. So personally, I think that's something really important. And so if I were somebody starting out again, certainly that's a piece of advice I would say. Focus on what matters to you. And yes, I think in that early phase, one does have to have the pictures, and it's actually a great thing about photography. I mean, there are a lot of professions where if you don't have a degree or you don't have the formal training, the doors are closed. But this is a field in which we're judged on the strength of the images that we produce. And so in that sense, at least, it's a much more open space than many. So yeah, you have to go and make the pictures about something that matters, something that's important to you. And I think that's where it begins.
Yeah, it's a very open medium. I mean, of course, it's you have to master the skills and get learn a lot of things about storytelling, about composing your images, to get to a certain level. But if you feel the drive, if you have something that moves you, you want to express and you want to say, then you find the means to come up with the images. And then it doesn't matter what you've been doing before. You are a good example so that you can change careers. Yesterday, there was a photographer on stage, Laetitia Vasson, and she said that she studied chemistry and was working to produce perfumes and was in the perfume industry, something completely different. And now she's working for the New York Times and just had a story of her published with, I think, a record of, I don't know how many.
44 images.
44 images. It's amazing. And I mean, of course, there's other who try and don't get to that point, but I think it all comes down to how strong and how passionate you are about what you.
Absolutely, and that's very much been something that's inspiring about being here at this festival. And I was saying the other day that coming here is a bit like recharging one's batteries, and you're surrounded by photographers, by people in the industry, people who are passionate about it, and it's always mind expanding to learn about other people's approaches and their history. And when we talk about, the commitment to getting the work done, sometimes it borders on the irresponsible or the stupid. We actually sold our house in Australia, and that was how we sort of had this year of reinvention. And then we had Nick Brandt on last night talking about how he almost bankrupted himself to produce the work. And I find that kind of commitment that so many of the photographers that we've seen here over these last few days have really very inspiring, that so many of them are so driven. Ragnar Axelsson talking about how he's lost the feeling in his hands from spending so much time out on the ice. And it's incredible the lengths that some of our colleagues will go to come back with the pictures, and that's really inspiring.
Yeah. We come back to the topic of funding your projects, but I'd like to stay for a moment with what you mentioned, and it's coming here. It's like recharging your batteries and talking to colleagues. There's different perspectives you have on this. Like for us, reporting on this event, like from a media perspective, we ask other questions than you ask your colleagues that you meet here, other photographers and the conversations. And there are photographers at different stages of their careers. There are photographers who just start out, some which have a certain degree of experience already in the field. And then there's photographers like Gerd Ludwig. You mentioned his National Geographic legend, working for more than 4 decades. And I'd like to hear from you, like in a conversation like that with a photographer like that, what is it that interests you? What topics do you touch on, and what do you take out of a conversation with photographers like Gerd Ludwig?
Well, certainly that being reminded for that question of commitment that we were just talking about, that's certainly something that comes to the fore. Frankly, last night I just enjoyed hearing his stories from the road, like some of the assignments that he had and how things worked, and just these crazy anecdotes from the things that happen sometimes while we're traveling. So frankly, I enjoyed that aspect of chatting with him. It was just fun to hang out with him. But again, because so much of our work is individual, and so many of the decisions we make about what we shoot, the images that we keep or the images that we throw away are so individual and are made alone. I find it really great to be in a space like this where I can ask photo editors, and what do you think of my work, and what do you think of this edit? And I've had a lot of constructive criticism over the last few days, which I will carry forward. And so I think it's through speaking, with people like him, but with so many of the people here that we learn and we grow. And it's also affirming. I mean, even if I didn't ask Gerd Ludwig specifically for advice about how would you approach this or how would you approach that, it's just affirming when we realize or share the experiences that we have in common, or the challenges that we have in common, or there are perhaps thoughts or opinions you have, and you find that other people are seeing it the same way. And it's a sense of community, which is nice.
Mm-hmm. You been part of this festival in 2018 when the festival first came to Baden. I mean, it's been going on in Gacilly for more years. I think they have their 20th anniversary shortly coming up. Now here in Baden, it's for the 5th time, but you were here for the first time in Baden with an exhibition. What kind of work did you show at that time?
So that actually was one of the bodies of work that I spoke about earlier that I shot while I was in Ghana. So this was a series on villages that are being swallowed by the sea on the Ghana coast. And so it was shown in Gacilly, and unfortunately I couldn't make it that year. I don't remember where I was, but was glad then to be able to come to Baden. And I love the concept of the festival. And I must also say it's wonderful to sort of come around a corner and see your picture printed up the side of a building, so that was also great. But I really love what Lois and Sylvia and their team have done here. It's such a beautiful setting, and given that so much of the focus is on the environment, it's the ideal setting to have a photo festival like this. Mm-hmm. And I love that it brings photography into public space, and it presents it to people who might not go to a gallery, or perhaps who aren't even that interested in photography as a medium, but who come into contact with a whole range of subjects that touch us emotionally and intellectually in this beautiful space. So it was great to be here then, and it's really nice to be able to be back again this year.
Yeah. Great venue. We talked about it before we started the recording that we hopefully get the chance to walk through the exhibitions today and take some time to really enjoy the images, which was we had a walk around with the photographers at the first day, which was very you could listen to the words of the photographers, but it was not enough time to really digest the images. So from the impressions you've gotten so far, what is it that that maybe stands out? Something you take away from looking at the work of the photographers here?
There's so much that I love here. I mean, there's so much that's incredibly inspiring. And it's always a sort of a point of growth just to see how other people approach topics, and it gives one ideas for things that one might try next time, or alternative approaches, or sometimes even just from some of the conversations I've had. Actually, one of the things that was really a kind of a key moment for me was just actually it was Letitia describing her approach to that project in Odessa, and I think very much the same way in the course of my own work when I'm shooting on the ground. But she just had a really nice way of formulating her strategy, and was just the process of her putting it in words her way that immediately made it clearer to me the way that I think on the road, even though I had not articulated it in that way. So these are the things that that I find great about events like this. I mean, there's so much work that literally it's kind of some of the best photography that's produced in the world that's here. So it's not surprising that that one would be inspired by it. But I guess I would have to say, like, Nick Brandt's project is just stunning. And I mean, the scale on which it's conceived is kind of awe-inspiring, really. So that was great. And it was even better to be able to hear him describe it last night.
Yeah.
And as someone who is not overly fond of the cold, Ragnar Axelsson's work, and just the thought of being, in these freezing conditions for so long, over so many years, to produce this incredibly evocative and powerful work was also, for me, as someone who's definitely more, biased towards being in warm places and cold places. That was also neat.
Yeah. To give some context, the work that Letitia did in the Ukraine, she went to Odessa and photographed the life of the people that's going on kind of between the war and trying to maintain a sense of normality. In that space. What was it exactly that fascinated you, or that sparked your interest about her approach and what she said, talking about her work there?
Well, first of all, her that body is incredibly consistent, stylistically, aesthetically, which is really neat, and produced in what's really not a very long period of time. I mean, 3 weeks is not ages, but she spoke about how her strategy was, not knowing exactly what the writer was going to be focusing on. So not having a concrete brief, in a sense, or a concrete direction. She thought, from a strategy point of view, okay, if I'm looking at, the political, the social, the economic, and so using those as her threads, and then making sure that she followed each one, which is a very methodical way of making sure that you've covered off everything, and of giving one a broad enough spread to make sure that at the end there's an edit either that covers all of those things or that would allow one to draw on specific things. So that's something that I think in similar ways when I'm on the road, but it's kind of been more an intuitive thing often, and thinking in storylines and that sort of thing. And that was just a nicely concrete way to put it, actually, I thought.
Yeah. Great. That takes us to your current work, or like as a photographer, sometimes you work with a journalist or who writes, provides text to the story. Sometimes it's not the case. And you are currently working on a very interesting project with the Frankfurter Allgemeine Sonntagszeitung. You mentioned you got a grant there to get some funding for a project that it's not just you're working together with colleagues. Can you give a little bit of detail? What is it about? And also very interesting, I think, for other photographers, this way to get funding. I mean, it's like you go out there, you travel to sometimes remote places. It all costs a lot of money to produce the kind of pictures. So twofold question.
Yeah. I think any photographer would say this, that it's harder and harder to fund work that matters, in my opinion, and above all, harder and harder to fund doing the work for enough time to do anything meaningful. Obviously the COVID situation has changed things even more, and I've really found that assignment work hasn't bounced back. Things are really quiet. But we're fortunate in Europe that we do have foundations, donor organizations, that will support projects. And that's been really important over the past few years. So actually it's funny, but, Laura Zahn Weiferscheid, who I've worked with a lot over these past few years, we actually met here in Baden in 2018, because she had worked on a book with Anne-Christine Wöhl, who was also here over the weekend, and so they made a book together with Lois Lammerhuber, and so we happened to meet here and sort of had shared interests, and it worked out that we could do an assignment in Georgia together. I think was the first one, and so we have been able to sort of find topics that we're interested in working in, or sometimes it's also a question of looking at, frankly, at what sort of funding is available and what interests we have that overlap with that, and have had success with the European Journalism Centre over the past few years with their grants. We also won the Gabriel Grüner Stipendium a couple of years ago, and we're able to do a project on that. And it's really the unfortunate reality that you either have to fund this work out of your own pocket and then hope that you can place it, publish it somehow to not only make your money back, but then also somehow live. Or one tries to find people who are willing to support your work. Again, of course, it helps if you have a track record and you can give people some sense of confidence that you can deliver. And it was great until a few years ago. Unfortunately, they no longer have it, but the European Journalism Centre had a program that was open to freelancers as well as staff journalists, and you could pitch a topic, write your proposal. You needed an expression of interest or a intent to publish from a media outlet or media outlets, and could then go out into the world. And so we were able to do a story on snakebite in Swaziland and Mozambique that way. We did a project on sickle cell disease. So that gives one the possibility to be in the field for long enough to do something actually useful, to actually get a little bit below the surface. And, I got an assignment inquiry recently. Would you go to Central Africa, probably spend 3 days? And it's like, you can't do anything worth doing in 3 days, or nothing that gets below the skin or that gets any sort of sense of the complexity of the people, of what it feels like to be there. And I think that's really an unfortunate reality of our current media landscape, that the budgets aren't there to do these things anymore. And so finding funding has been a massively important part of being able to do these stories. It's also a lot of work, unfortunately, in that, you have to do a lot of the background research beforehand. So at the moment, Laura and I have been speaking with researchers and experts all over the place about topics that we're interested in, with a view to developing the funding proposals to then carry these projects forward. So there is a lot that one does in terms of the background work, the desktop-based work, the research, and you don't know if it's going to work out ultimately, because you don't know if you're going to succeed in finding the funding. But without that work, I mean, I think it's important on two levels. I mean, one, you have to do the background work to be able to approach a subject intelligently, and to know what it is that you're looking for and what the touch points of the issue are. So that's one reason why the background work is super important. But then also to be able to write a compelling proposal that demonstrates that you have the understanding and the ability to go after what it is that you say you're going to do. But certainly it's not as easy as a publication coming to you and saying, here's a brief, go wherever and do that. And the reality is in my experience anyway, that just happens less and less.
Yeah. It's maybe also more how it worked in the old days, that you got a media outlet that sent you somewhere, that provided some funding and paid you ideally beforehand, so you could cover your costs. These days you have to get more creative and seek for funding in places where you might not imagine that you'd find them there. I found that very interesting what you mentioned, that you try to connect with scientists, and I think that's a path worth pursuing and thinking about, because science is often very data-based and dry and very hard to visualize. So scientists need photographers to make their results visible, or their work. So there's an opportunity to team up and see if both sides can benefit from something. And if you team up and get the expertise to take in as a photographer, it enriches your work. And then I think you are on a good way and could find the funding.
Very much so. I think particularly if one is in the documentary field, or if one is working on issues, on themes, it's about much, much more than the ability to take a picture. And I mean, frankly, there are a lot of people who can make great pictures. So being able to make the picture alone is not enough. It also has to be about finding the topics and about understanding it well enough to approach it. And I find it interesting, again, talking to photographers over the past few days, people like you were saying, Letitia was a chemist, and I was talking to Arne Hodlich from Slovenia, and he was a biologist. And this past experience does come to bear in the work that we carry forward, even if it's not necessarily in our specific area of expertise. But, the research skills that I have from my previous life have been fantastically useful as a photographer. The ability to write has been incredibly important. And even having a background in technology, amongst other things, has also been helpful in that I've done a fair bit of work over the past few years for the Internet Society, for example. And, I spent probably, a few months in Georgia for them over various trips, following a project that took internet access into the Caucasus Mountains. And having a background in the internet space means that I'm in a better position to understand what they are doing with the technology and to understand the problems that they're trying to solve. And then that allows you to ask better questions and ultimately to take better pictures because you understand the situation better. So yeah, I mean, definitely connecting with experts is a very important part of the kind of work that I'm doing at the moment. And, it's very much the case that as photographers, obviously we aren't experts in everything. So you kind of have to find the people who are the experts in something that you're trying to understand, and whether that's actually speaking with them or finding the research papers or both. That's really an important part of formulating the approach. And then, as you say, very definitely, it's also a case where you have people who are working on things that are really important, but sometimes they're not sexy, quote unquote. And so they receive very little attention. And it's great sometimes to be able to bring a little bit of light to the sometimes amazing things that people are doing, but that basically no one knows about. So as you say, that is a really good point of cooperation sometimes.
The example of the project that you pitched to the Frankfurter Allgemeine Sonntagszeitung and that you got this grant for, what is it about?
So there was a round of grants for publishers put out by the European Journalism Centre, and they were broadly speaking, sort of, touching on sustainable development in terms of the goals of the grant. And so Laura and I and Kai Kupferschmidt, a science journalist, kind of got together and came up with this project Construct. And it was actually Kai who said, why don't we do trees? And so we thought, yeah, that's great. And so we started formulating possible story ideas and formulated the project concept, the construct, and then got together with Sonja Castellan at the Frankfurter Allgemeine Sonntagszeitung, who we had worked with a lot before, and said, we have this idea, could we partner with you to put in this proposal? And glad to say that our application was successful, and so we were able to fund a year-long project looking at stories that revolve, loosely speaking, around the relationships between humans and trees. And so looking at a range of different topics. So of the stories that Laura and I worked on, for example, how traditional beliefs are being revived and combined with modern conservation approaches to try and save what remains of the forests in Benin. There were once these great sacred forests, and now sometimes all that remains is sometimes even just a tree or these tiny little, the sacred core of the forest. We looked at the impact that invasive foreign tree species are having on the water supply around Cape Town, which, as most people probably know, very famously almost ran dry in 2018. And invasive trees, so Australian acacias, pines, eucalypts, are having a huge impact on the water table and also on the endemic ecosystems in the Cape region. And there's a whole lot of plant species that are found nowhere else in the world. So we did a story on a really ambitious project that's clearing trees from over 50,000 hectares of watersheds around the Cape region, and teams of specialists have to be helicoptered in and use climbing gear to climb up cliff faces to clear the trees and so on. We looked at seaweed farming. We thought it was important to include an ocean element because that's also part of our sustainability climate crisis. And so we looked at seaweed farming in Zanzibar, and a couple of other stories, Congo as well, for example. And so that was the basic concept. So looking at these examples of how we are relating forests and to nature, and looking at examples that are both inspiring or that perhaps suggest a way forward. Others that look at the problems, the complexity, and try to shed light on some of that complexity and to show the importance of looking at these issues more holistically.
Yeah. Great body of work that you put together there. So many different facets that you go into and try to make visible or make the climate change and all that it implies on the destruction of our planet. It's obviously a little bit difficult to talk about these things. You want to, I think, see the pictures to go with these projects. So what would be a good place for people listening to this to go and have a look at the pictures?
Well, the stories we just discussed are on the Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung website, so faz.net, and if you search for Tree Palaver, Palaver, Tree Palaver was the name of the overall project. So those stories are there, along with ones done by Sonia herself, and then there were a couple of other freelancers who came in, Andreas Frey, and I've forgotten her name, it's terrible, that a freelancer in Singapore who produced a story on mangroves there. So that collection of stories is online there. And then, of course, there's work on my website, which is nqphotography.com.
Mm-hmm. Great. We link to that. And well, thank you very much, Nyani. It's been a pleasure talking about your work, getting some insights, and keep on with the good work, and good luck for your future projects. And thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure here today.